Alright, picture this. You're a successful merchant sailing across the Mediterranean. Your ship is loaded with valuable cargo, purple dye from Phoenicia, maybe some fine pottery, the kinds of goods that could make you wealthy. You know these waters. This is the family business. This is your future. And then, everything goes to hell. A storm hits. Your ship breaks apart. Your cargo, your entire fortune, sinks to the bottom of the sea. You wash up on a foreign shore with literally nothing but the clothes on your back. Now, for most people, that's a tragedy. That's the end of the story. But for one man, a Phoenician Greek merchant named Zeno, it was the beginning of something extraordinary. That shipwreck didn't destroy his life, it transformed it. What emerged from that disaster became one of the most influential philosophical movements in human history. A philosophy that would guide Roman emperors, inspire Renaissance thinkers, and, here's what's remarkable, is experiencing a massive resurgence right now, in our own chaotic times. We're talking about Stoicism, and today we're going back to the source, to the man who started it all, Zeno of Kition. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Great, another dead Greek guy telling me how to live my life. But here's the thing. Zeno wasn't some ivory tower academic. He was a businessman who lost everything. He knew failure. He knew what it felt like when life doesn't go according to plan. And that's exactly why his philosophy matters. Because he didn't develop these ideas in some comfortable study. He forged them in the aftermath of personal catastrophe. He asked the questions we're still asking. When everything falls apart, what actually matters? What can't be taken from us? How do we find meaning when the universe seems indifferent to our plans? The subtitle on this slide says we're exploring the life, teachings, and enduring legacy of Zeno. But really, we're doing something more intimate than that. We're tracing how one man's worst day became the foundation for a philosophy that's helped millions of people navigate their own worst days. So let's dive into this story. Let's see how a shipwreck led to wisdom. Zeno was born around 334 BC in Citium, modern-day Larnaca on the island of Cyprus. Now this detail matters more than you might think. Cyprus was a crossroads of cultures, Phoenician, Greek, Egyptian influences all mixing together. Zeno himself came from Phoenician Greek merchant stock, which means he grew up in a world of commerce, trade routes, and cultural exchange. His father was a merchant, and young Zeno followed in those footsteps. This wasn't philosophy, this was business. Practical, concrete. You buy goods here, sell them there, make a profit. The Mediterranean was his classroom, and the curriculum was commerce. And honestly, he was probably pretty good at it. We don't have records of him being a failed merchant. This was his life, his identity, his future, until that fateful voyage. Here's where it gets interesting. The shipwreck happens, and we don't know all the details, but we know the result. Zeno ends up in Athens, stranded, broke, probably traumatized. Everything he owned, everything he'd worked for, is gone. And he wanders into a bookshop. Now think about that for a second. He could have done anything. He could have tried to contact his family, beg for money to get home, find work loading ships in the harbor. But instead, he wanders into a bookshop and picks up Xenophon's Memorabilia, a book about Socrates. And I love this because it's so human, right? Like, well, I've lost everything. Might as well read a book. It's the ancient equivalent of having a terrible day and ending up in a bookstore at midnight because you don't know what else to do. But this wasn't just any book. The Memorabilia is Xenophon's recollections of Socrates, the gadfly of Athens, the man who questioned everything, who said the unexamined life isn't worth living. And something in those pages grabbed Zeno by the throat. The slide says it sparked an insatiable hunger for wisdom. That's not hyperbole. Zeno allegedly turned to the bookseller and asked, "Where can I find men like this?" The bookseller pointed to a guy walking by, Crates of Thebes, a cynic philosopher. And Zeno's life changed forever. Now, Crates was a cynic, and we need to understand what that meant. The cynics believed that conventional society was fundamentally corrupt. They rejected wealth, status, social norms, all of it. Crates himself had given away his fortune to live in voluntary poverty. He walked around Athens in rags, owned nothing, and was completely free. For a merchant who'd just lost everything, can you imagine how radical this must have seemed? Here was a man who had chosen to give up what Zeno had just lost involuntarily, and Crates was happy, free, unburdened. Zeno studied with Crates and other philosophers for years. He absorbed Cynic ethics, Socratic dialectic, ideas from the Megarian school about logic. He was building something new, synthesizing all these influences. But here's what's crucial, and this is where Zeno's genius shows. He didn't just become a cynic. He took their ethical insights about virtue and self-sufficiency, but he rejected their extreme rejection of society. He thought, what if we could live virtuously within society? What if we could be both wise and engaged citizens? Around 300 BC, Zeno started teaching at a public colonnade in Athens called the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch. And that's where our story really begins. Because what he taught there wasn't just philosophy for philosophers. It was a comprehensive system for living, for anyone willing to think seriously about their life. And the fact that he taught in a public porch, not some exclusive academy, that tells you everything. This wasn't philosophy for the elite. This was wisdom for anyone walking by who wanted to stop and listen. So here's where we are. A merchant loses everything in a shipwreck, wanders into a bookshop, discovers philosophy, studies with radical thinkers, and then creates something entirely new, a philosophy that says you can lose your cargo, your wealth, your status, everything external, and still live a good life. Still be happy. Still flourish. That's not just philosophy. That's survival wisdom forged in the crucible of real loss. But what exactly did he teach in that painted porch? What was this system that would captivate the ancient world and still speaks to us today? That's where we're heading next, to the Stoa Poikile itself, where Stoicism was born. So we left Zeno standing at a crossroads, literally and philosophically. He's absorbed the wisdom of the Cynics, studied Socratic dialectic, learned logic from the Megarians. But he's not satisfied with just being a student. He's got something new to say, and around 300 BC, he finds his platform, the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch. Picture a long colonnade in the heart of Athens, covered walkway, columns, and walls decorated with these magnificent murals depicting Greek military victories. It's a public space. People walk through it every day on their way to the agora, the marketplace. It's not a temple, not an academy, not some exclusive philosophical school hidden behind walls. It's just there. Open. Accessible. And that's where Zeno sets up shop. Now, I want you to appreciate the audacity of this move. Athens already had prestigious philosophical schools. You had Plato's Academy still operating. You had Aristotle's Lyceum. These were the Harvard and Yale of the ancient world. And here comes Zeno, this Phoenician merchant turned philosopher. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to teach in a public porch. But this wasn't just about accessibility, though that mattered enormously. This was a philosophical statement in itself. The location embodied the teaching. See, the Cynics had rejected society entirely. They lived on the margins, deliberately shocking people, rejecting all social conventions. But Zeno thought that was a mistake. He believed wisdom should engage with the world, not flee from it. So he taught in the most public space imaginable, right in the middle of civic life. The slide says this democratized philosophy by teaching freely in a public space. And that's exactly right, but let me tell you why that's revolutionary. In the ancient world, philosophy was generally for the elite. You needed leisure time, money, education. The great schools charged fees. They were exclusive. But Zeno? Anyone could walk by the Stoa Poikile and stop to listen. A merchant, a slave, a politician, a housewife, didn't matter. If you could think, you could do philosophy. And here's what's beautiful. The name Stoicism comes from this porch. Stoa means porch or colonnade. So every time we say Stoic philosophy, we're remembering that public space, that democratic impulse, that idea that wisdom belongs to everyone. The philosophy is literally named after a place where anyone could walk in off the street. Now, what made Zeno's teaching truly groundbreaking wasn't just where he taught, but what he taught and how he organized it. Look at the second point on this slide, systematic unity. This is crucial. Before Zeno, philosophical schools tended to focus on specific areas. The Cynics were all about ethics, how to live. The Megarians were obsessed with logic and dialectic. The natural philosophers studied physics and cosmology. But Zeno looked at this fragmentation and thought, this is wrong. Reality isn't divided into separate compartments. Everything connects. So he created something unprecedented, a unified philosophical system where logic, physics, and ethics all support and reinforce each other. They're not separate subjects. They're three aspects of one coherent worldview. Zeno himself used a beautiful metaphor for this. He compared philosophy to an orchard. Logic is the protective wall around the orchard. It guards against bad reasoning, fallacies, confused thinking. Physics is the trees, the study of nature, reality, how the universe actually works. And ethics is the fruit, the practical wisdom that nourishes human life. And here's why this matters for us, right now, today. Zeno understood that you can't just cherry-pick the parts of philosophy you like. You can't say, oh, I'll take the ethics, but ignore the physics. Because your view of how the universe works fundamentally shapes what you think is good and right. If you believe the universe is chaotic and meaningless, you'll live one way. If you believe it's rationally ordered, you'll live differently. Your physics determines your ethics. That's the systematic unity Zeno insisted on. Everything connects, which brings us to the heart of it all. Nature and reason. Here's the revolutionary idea that Zeno planted in that public porch. The idea that would echo through centuries. True happiness comes from living in harmony with nature and reason. Now we need to unpack this because it's easy to misunderstand. When Zeno says live according to nature, he doesn't mean go be a caveman or reject civilization. The cynics kind of meant that. Zeno means something far more sophisticated. For Zeno, nature has two meanings that work together. First, it means the nature of the universe, the rational order, the logos, the way reality actually is. And second, it means human nature specifically, what we are, what makes us distinctively human. And here's the key insight. What makes us human is our capacity for reason. That's our nature. We're the rational animals. So living according to nature means living according to reason, both the reason that structures the cosmos and the reason that defines our humanity. And this is where it gets practical. Virtue isn't some abstract thing. It's not about following arbitrary rules or pleasing the gods or conforming to social expectations. Virtue is the practical alignment of your life with reality. It's seeing the world clearly, understanding your place in it, and acting rationally in response to what actually is. The slide says, virtue isn't abstract, it's practical alignment with the universe's rational order. That's it. That's the whole game. Think about it this way. If you're constantly angry about things you can't control, the weather, other people's opinions, the fact that you're going to die someday, you're not living according to nature. You're fighting reality. You're being irrational. But if you focus your energy on what you can actually control, your own thoughts, choices, actions, you're aligned with nature. You're being rational. You're being virtuous. And according to Zeno, that alignment is what happiness actually is. This is radically different from how most people think about happiness. We tend to think happiness comes from getting what we want, pleasure, success, comfort, recognition. But Zeno says no. Happiness is a good flow of life, eudaimonia, which we'll talk more about in the next slide. It's not about external circumstances at all. It's about the quality of your character and the rationality of your choices. You could lose everything in a shipwreck, and Zeno knew this from experience, and still be happy if you're living virtuously. Now I know this might sound austere, maybe even harsh. You mean happiness doesn't depend on whether good or bad things happen to me? That's exactly what Zeno means. And before you reject that as crazy, consider this. How many people do you know who have everything, wealth, health, success, and are still miserable? And how many people have faced terrible hardships but maintained their dignity, their peace of mind, their capacity for joy? Zeno's point is that happiness is an inside job. It's about who you are, not what happens to you. And that idea, that radical, empowering, terrifying idea, that's what he taught in the Stoa Poikile. That's what drew students from across the Mediterranean. That's what would eventually captivate Roman emperors and Renaissance humanists and modern people struggling with anxiety and uncertainty. Because here's the truth. We can't control the storms. We can't prevent the shipwrecks. But we can control how we respond. We can choose to live rationally, virtuously, in alignment with nature. That's Stoicism. That's what was born in that painted porch. All right, so we've established the foundation. Zeno teaching in a public space, creating a unified system, centering everything on nature and reason. Now let's get into the specifics of what this actually means for how we live. This slide breaks it down into 3 core concepts, and I want to take each one seriously, because they're all challenging in different ways. The slide defines happiness as a good flow of life, eudaimonia in Greek. And immediately, we need to understand that this is not what we usually mean by happiness. When we say, I'm happy, we usually mean, I feel good right now. It's an emotion, a feeling state. You eat good food, you're happy. You get a promotion, you're happy. You fall in love, you're happy. But for Zeno, that's not eudaimonia, that's just pleasure or satisfaction, and it's completely unreliable because it depends on circumstances outside your control. Eudaimonia is something different. It's the flourishing that comes from living well, from being the kind of person you're capable of being. It's an active state, not a passive feeling. The slide says it's achieved not through pleasure or wealth, but through virtue and rational living. Let me give you a concrete example of what this means. Imagine two people. Person A wins the lottery. They're thrilled, euphoric, happy in the conventional sense. But they don't change who they are. They're still petty, still dishonest, still controlled by their impulses. They just have more money to indulge those impulses. Person B faces a serious illness. They're not experiencing pleasure. Life is hard, but they face it with courage. They're honest with themselves and others. They use the experience to clarify what matters. They grow. For Zeno, person B is experiencing eudaimonia even in suffering, while person A is not, despite their good fortune. Because eudaimonia isn't about what happens to you, it's about the quality of your character and choices in response to what happens. It's a good flow of life. Emphasis on good. In the moral sense, not just pleasant. It's excellence in action. It's virtue manifested over time. And yes, this is demanding. Zeno's not offering you a happiness hack or a quick fix. He's offering you something harder and more valuable, a way to flourish regardless of circumstances, which, if you think about it, is the only kind of happiness worth having, because circumstances change. They always do. Now we get to something really profound. The slide says, human reason, or logos, connects us to the universe's rational structure. Okay, this is where Stoicism gets metaphysical, and we need to take it seriously. Zeno believed, and this comes from his physics, remember the systematic unity, that the universe itself is rational. It's not chaos, it's not random, it's structured by logos, reason, order, rationality. And here's the extraordinary claim. That same logos exists in us. Our capacity for reason isn't some accident or evolutionary quirk. It's a participation in the fundamental nature of reality. Think about what this means. When you reason clearly, when you think logically, when you understand cause and effect, you're not just using a useful tool. You're aligning yourself with the deepest structure of the cosmos. The universe is rational, and you are rational. That's not a coincidence, that's a connection. This is why Zeno believed that by cultivating our rational faculty, we align ourselves with cosmic order and discover our true nature as thinking beings. You're not separate from nature, observing it from outside. You're part of it. Your reason is nature's reason. Your mind is the universe becoming conscious of itself. Now, I know this might sound mystical or woo-woo, but Zeno meant it quite literally. He was a materialist. He thought logos was physical, like a subtle fire pervading everything. But whether you buy the physics or not, the ethical implication is clear. Your highest capacity, your ability to think, to reason, to understand, that's what connects you to reality. That's what you should cultivate above all else, and this has practical implications. It means that living rationally isn't just personally beneficial, it's cosmically appropriate. You're fulfilling your nature when you think clearly and act reasonably. It also means that all rational beings share something fundamental. We're all connected through logos, which is why Zeno could envision a universal human community. We'll talk about that later, because reason is universal. All right, here's where Stoicism gets its reputation for being cold and unemotional, and I need to be honest with you. This is the most misunderstood part of Stoic philosophy. Passions cloud judgment and disturb inner peace. Through rigorous self-control and the transformation of destructive emotions into clear-eyed rationality, we achieve tranquility and resilience against life's storms. Now people hear this and think Stoics are supposed to be emotionless robots. Don't feel anything. Suppress everything. Be cold and detached. That's completely wrong, and it's not what Zeno taught. Zeno distinguished between emotions and what he called passions, or pathy. Passions are irrational, excessive emotional responses based on false judgments about what's good or bad. For example, you believe that wealth is genuinely good, not just preferred. So when you lose money, you experience not just disappointment, but devastation, because you believe you've lost something truly valuable. That's a passion. It's based on a false judgment. Or you believe that other people's opinions define your worth. So you experience not just awareness of criticism, but crushing shame, because you've made a false judgment about where your value comes from. Zeno's point isn't, don't feel anything. It's, don't base your emotional life on false beliefs about what matters. The slide talks about transformation of destructive emotions into clear-eyed rationality. That's the key word, transformation, not suppression. You transform destructive emotions by examining the beliefs underneath them. You ask, why am I so angry right now? What judgment am I making? Is it true? Is it rational? And often, you'll find you're angry because you believe something should be different than it is. You're fighting reality. You're being irrational. Like, I can't tell you how much of my own anger comes from the belief that traffic should move faster, that people should be more competent, that the world should arrange itself for my convenience. And every time the Stoic response is the same. Is that rational? Do you control traffic? Do you control other people? No? Then why are you angry about it? But here's what's important. Transforming destructive emotions doesn't mean you become indifferent. It means you respond to reality appropriately, not excessively. You can prefer health to sickness without being devastated by illness. You can value relationships without being destroyed when they end. You can care deeply about justice without being consumed by rage at injustice. The goal is what the slide calls tranquility and resilience against life's storms. Not numbness, not indifference, but a deep, stable peace that comes from knowing what actually matters and not being thrown around by circumstances. And this brings us full circle to where we started, with Zeno's shipwreck. Imagine if Zeno had responded to that disaster with uncontrolled passion, rage at the storm, despair at his loss, bitterness at his fate. He could have spent the rest of his life consumed by those emotions. Instead, he transformed that experience. He examined it rationally. He asked what actually mattered, and he discovered that losing his cargo didn't mean losing his capacity to live well. That's disciplined emotions in action. That's the transformation from destructive passion to clear-eyed rationality. So here's what we've covered in this slide. Happiness is an active state of virtuous living, not a feeling dependent on circumstances. Reason connects us to the fundamental nature of reality and defines our humanity. And emotional discipline means transforming irrational responses into rational ones, achieving peace without indifference. These three ideas, eudaimonia, logos, and emotional transformation, these are the core of Zeno's philosophy. Everything else builds on this foundation. But Zeno didn't just leave it abstract. He organized this wisdom into a comprehensive system, a way of understanding everything from logic to physics to ethics. And that's where we're going next, to the three pillars that support the entire Stoic worldview. So we've established the foundation, happiness as virtuous living, reason as our connection to reality, emotions transformed through rational understanding. But Zeno wasn't content with just stating these principles. He wanted to show how they fit together, how they support each other, how they create a complete worldview. And that's where the architecture of Stoicism really shines. All right, I want you to remember that orchard metaphor I mentioned earlier. Zeno used it to describe the structure of philosophy, and it's brilliant because it shows you how everything connects. You've got the protective wall, that's logic. You've got the trees, that's physics. And you've got the fruit, that's ethics. Each part has its function, but they're all part of one living system. Now the slide breaks this down for us, and I want to take each pillar seriously, because understanding how they work together is crucial to understanding why Stoicism is so powerful. The slide says, Zeno developed sophisticated theories of knowledge and reasoning, teaching students to distinguish truth from error through rigorous analysis and dialectic. Now, when we hear logic, we might think of formal systems, syllogisms, abstract rules. And yes, Stoic logic included that. They were actually pioneers in propositional logic, which wouldn't be fully appreciated until the 20th century. But for Zeno, logic was something more fundamental and more practical. It was about how you know what you know, how you distinguish reality from appearance, how you avoid being fooled by others or by yourself. Think about how much bad thinking surrounds us: conspiracy theories, propaganda, advertising designed to manipulate, social media echo chambers, our own cognitive biases, and wishful thinking. Zeno understood that if you can't think clearly, you're vulnerable. You'll be tossed around by every persuasive speaker, every emotional appeal, every comforting lie. That's why logic is the protective wall. It guards the orchard. It keeps out the weeds of bad reasoning, the pests of fallacious arguments, the invasive species of false beliefs. Zeno developed what's called the Stoic criterion of truth, the cataleptic impression. Without getting too technical, the idea is that some perceptions are so clear, so compelling, so self-evidently true that they force our assent. But, and this is crucial, you have to train yourself to recognize these genuine perceptions and distinguish them from mere opinions or false impressions. It's like developing a bullshit detector, except Zeno would say it more elegantly. You're training yourself to recognize when you actually know something versus when you just think you know something. And let me tell you, that distinction matters, because most of our suffering comes from being certain about things that aren't true. Now we get to the trees, the study of nature, the cosmos, reality itself. The cosmos operates as a rational, interconnected organism governed by divine reason. Everything happens according to natural law, from celestial movements to human affairs. This is where Stoicism gets really interesting, and also where it might challenge some of our modern assumptions. Zeno was a materialist, but not in the modern sense. He believed everything that exists is physical, even reason, even God, even the soul. But he also believed the universe is alive, rational, and purposeful. Think of it like this. The cosmos is one vast, interconnected organism, and it's structured by logos. Divine reason, rational order, call it what you will. Everything that happens according to this rational structure. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Wait, is this determinism? Is Zeno saying everything is predetermined? Yes and no. It's complicated. Zeno believed in what we might call rational necessity. Events follow from causes according to natural law. The universe unfolds according to its nature. In that sense, yes, everything that happens had to happen given the prior conditions, but, and this is important, that doesn't mean human choice is an illusion. Your choices are part of the causal chain. Your reason, your character, your decisions, these are real forces in the world. They're part of how the rational universe operates. It's like, imagine you're a musician in an orchestra. The piece you're playing is already written. That's fate, the rational order of the cosmos. But how you play your part, the skill and artistry you bring to it, the choices you make about tempo and dynamics, that's up to you. You're both following the score and creating something unique. And here's why the physics matters for how we live. If the universe is rational, then accepting what happens isn't resignation, it's alignment with reason. If everything happens according to natural law, then fighting against reality is irrational. The slide says everything happens according to natural law, from celestial movements to human affairs. That means your life is part of the cosmic order. Not random, not meaningless, part of a rational whole. Now, does this mean you should just accept everything passively? Oh, well, the universe is rational, so I'll just sit here and do nothing? No, because remember, your choices are part of the natural law too. Your reason is part of the cosmic reason. Acting rationally is how you participate in the universe's rationality. And now we get to the fruit, the whole point of the orchard. All study serves one purpose: learning to live virtuously in accordance with nature's laws. Wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance guide the flourishing life. Here's what's beautiful about Stoic ethics. It's not arbitrary. It's not based on divine command or social convention or personal preference. It flows directly from logic and physics. If the universe is rational and you are rational, then living rationally is living in harmony with reality. That's virtue. That's the good life. If everything is interconnected, then harming others harms the whole, including yourself. That's why justice matters. If events follow natural law, then wisdom means understanding that law and accepting what must be. That's why wisdom matters. If you're going to face difficulties, and you will, because that's nature, then you need courage to face them well. That's why courage matters. And if you're going to navigate desires and impulses, you need self-control. That's why temperance matters. These four cardinal virtues, wisdom, courage, justice, temperance, aren't random. They're the qualities you need to live rationally in a rational universe. And notice, They're all about who you are, not what you have. They're all within your control. They're all available to anyone, regardless of circumstances. A slave can be wise. A poor person can be courageous. An outcast can be just. Anyone can practice temperance. The slide says, all study serves one purpose, learning to live virtuously, and that's the key to understanding Stoicism's structure. Logic isn't just intellectual exercise, it's training in clear thinking so you can make virtuous choices. Physics isn't just abstract cosmology, it's understanding reality so you can live in harmony with it. Everything points toward ethics. Everything serves the goal of living well. The wall protects the trees so they can bear fruit. The trees grow and flourish so they can produce fruit. The fruit is the point. Ethics is the point. But you can't have the fruit without the trees and the wall. You can't have good ethics without understanding reality, physics, and thinking clearly, logic. This is why Zeno's system is so powerful. It's not fragmented. It's not, here are some nice ethical ideas, take them or leave them. It's a complete worldview where everything supports everything else. If you understand the physics, that the universe is rational and interconnected, then the ethics make sense. If you practice the logic, clear thinking, distinguishing truth from error, then you can actually live the ethics. And if you live the ethics, virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, temperance, then you're fulfilling your nature as a rational being in a rational cosmos. It's like Zeno built this beautiful, interlocking structure where you can't pull out one piece without the whole thing making less sense, which is either brilliant philosophy or really good marketing, depending on how cynical you are. But here's what I want you to take away from this slide. Stoicism isn't just a collection of good advice. It's a systematic philosophy where logic, physics, and ethics form one coherent whole, and that coherence is part of its power. Because when you understand how the pieces fit together, when you see that living virtuously isn't arbitrary but is actually alignment with reality itself, that's when Stoicism stops being just interesting and starts being transformative. Now, Zeno could have stopped there. He could have said, here's a complete philosophical system. Logic, physics, ethics, done. But he didn't, because he had a vision that was even more radical, even more challenging to the world he lived in. A vision that would scandalize his contemporaries and inspire reformers for centuries. He imagined a world without borders. Okay, I need you to understand how absolutely revolutionary this next part is. We're in the 4th-3rd century BC. The Greek world is defined by the polis, the city-state. Your identity, your rights, your entire social existence depends on which city you're from. Athens versus Sparta. Greeks versus barbarians. Citizens versus foreigners. Free versus slave. Men versus women. These divisions aren't just social conventions, they're considered natural, ordained by the gods, fundamental to reality itself. And into this world comes Zeno with an idea that must have seemed insane. The slide mentions Zeno's lost work, The Republic, and we need to talk about this because it's one of the most fascinating what-ifs in philosophical history. We don't have the text, it's lost. But we have descriptions of it from later writers, and what they describe is shocking. His lost work, The Republic, proposed a society transcending geographical and cultural boundaries, a cosmopolis united not by force, but by shared reason and mutual respect. A cosmopolis, a world city, not Athens writ large, not a Greek empire, a community of all rational beings, regardless of where they're from. Now, this wasn't just political idealism. This was a direct logical consequence of Stoic physics and ethics. Think about it. If all humans share the same rational nature, if we all participate in the same cosmic logos, then what justifies dividing us by arbitrary geographical boundaries? If virtue is the only true good and virtue is available to anyone regardless of birth or status, then what justifies social hierarchies based on wealth or class or gender? According to later reports, Zeno's Republic proposed some truly radical ideas. No temples, because the divine is everywhere, not confined to buildings. No law courts, because wise people don't need external enforcement to do what's right. No separate housing for men and women, because gender doesn't determine virtue or rationality. No conventional marriage, because relationships should be based on mutual respect and friendship, not legal contracts or property arrangements. And you can imagine how well this went over in ancient Athens, right? the city that prided itself on its democratic institutions, its temples, its strict gender segregation, its legal system. Zeno is basically saying, yeah, all that, not necessary. In fact, it's kind of missing the point. But here's what's important. Zeno wasn't just being provocative. He was following his principles to their logical conclusion. He advocated radical equality, imagining a city of wise men and women where divisions of nationality, class, and gender held no power. A city of wise men and women in ancient Greece, where women couldn't vote, couldn't own property, couldn't participate in public life. Zeno's saying, if a woman can be wise, if she can be virtuous, if she can reason, and she can, then she's your equal in what actually matters. The slide makes this point beautifully. Citizens would be bound by friendship and virtue, not by laws enforced through courts or punishment. This is the key. Zeno's cosmopolis isn't held together by force or fear or legal compulsion. It's held together by what he called oikiosis, a natural affinity, a recognition of kinship. Oikiosis is this idea that we naturally recognize ourselves in others. We start with self-love, caring for our own preservation and flourishing. Then we extend that care to our family, then to our community, then, if we're rational, to all of humanity. Because if reason is universal, then everyone who shares reason is, in a sense, family. We are, fundamentally, citizens of the cosmos. That's the line from the slide, and it's the heart of Stoic cosmopolitanism. Your primary identity isn't Athenian or Spartan, Greek or barbarian, rich or poor, male or female. Your primary identity is cosmopolitan, citizen of the cosmos. You're a rational being in a rational universe, and that connects you to every other rational being, regardless of all the superficial differences. Now, I want to be honest about something. This wasn't utopian dreaming in the sense of, this will definitely happen tomorrow. Zeno knew most people weren't wise. He knew his ideal city was a city of sages, and sages are rare. But that doesn't make the vision pointless, because it shows you what's possible. It shows you what we should aspire to. It shows you that the divisions we take for granted aren't natural or necessary. They're choices. And here's why this matters for us right now in our world. We still divide ourselves by nationality, race, religion, class, gender, political tribe. We still act like these divisions are fundamental, natural, insurmountable. And Stoicism says, no, these are accidents of birth and circumstance. What's fundamental is our shared rationality, our shared capacity for virtue, our shared participation in the cosmic order. This wasn't utopian dreaming, but a logical extension of Stoic physics. If all humans share the same rational nature and divine spark, artificial distinctions become meaningless. Artificial distinctions, that's what they are. Not natural, not divinely ordained, artificial. Now, does this mean Stoics think everyone is identical? That there are no real differences between cultures or individuals? No. Of course there are differences, but those differences don't determine your moral worth or your capacity for virtue. A Stoic can appreciate cultural diversity, recognize individual uniqueness, and still maintain that what matters most, reason, virtue, human dignity, is universal. It's like, you can notice that people speak different languages without thinking that some languages make their speakers morally superior. The diversity is real, but it doesn't create a hierarchy of human worth. That's what Zeno understood 2,300 years ago. So here's the radical vision, a world where people recognize their fundamental kinship, where virtue matters more than status, where reason unites rather than divides, where you can lose your cargo in a shipwreck, wash up on a foreign shore, and be welcomed not as an outsider, but as a fellow citizen of the cosmos. Zeno's republic is lost. We'll never read his full argument, but the vision survived. It survived in the Stoicism of the Roman Empire, where a slave, Epictetus, and an emperor, Marcus Aurelius, could share the same philosophy. It survived in the cosmopolitan ideals of the Enlightenment. It survives today in every movement for universal human rights, for equality, for recognizing our common humanity across all the divisions we create. And that vision, that radical, challenging, inspiring vision, didn't just stay abstract. Zeno lived it, he taught it. He embodied it in how he ran his school, how he treated his students, how he engaged with the diverse, cosmopolitan city of Athens. Which brings us to the wisdom itself, the actual words and teachings that have echoed through the centuries. The practical philosophy that people could use, could live by, could transform their lives with. Let's look at what Zeno actually said. So we've seen the architecture of Zeno's thought, the three pillars working together, the radical vision of universal brotherhood. But philosophy isn't just abstract systems and grand visions. It's also practical wisdom you can actually use, and Zeno understood this. He didn't just write treatises, he taught, he conversed. He distilled his philosophy into memorable sayings that people could carry with them, could apply in their daily lives. Let's look at some of those sayings, and more importantly, let's understand what they really mean. All right. This slide gives us 3 quotes attributed to Zeno, and I want to spend real time with each one because these aren't just clever sayings. They're compressed philosophy. Each one contains layers of meaning that connect back to everything we've discussed. And here's what I love about these quotes. They're practical. They're memorable. They're the kind of thing you can actually use when life gets hard. We've already talked about eudaimonia, but I want to come back to this because it's so central, and this particular phrasing is so perfect. True contentment isn't found in external circumstances, but in the quality of our actions and character, a dynamic state of virtuous living. Notice that word, flow, not a static state. Not a destination you reach and then you're done. A flow. Think about a river. A healthy river is always moving, always flowing. It's not stagnant. It's alive, dynamic, responding to the terrain, carving its path. That's what a good life is like. It's not about achieving some perfect state and freezing there. It's about the ongoing activity of living well, making good choices, responding virtuously to whatever comes. So when something bad happens, and it will, the question isn't, am I still happy? In the emotional sense. The question is, am I still flowing well? Am I still living virtuously? Am I still making good choices? It's like the difference between asking, do I feel good right now? Versus, am I being good right now? And honestly, the second question is way more useful because you actually have control over it. The slide says this is a dynamic state of virtuous living. Dynamic, active, ongoing. You're not trying to achieve happiness and then maintain it. You're trying to live well, continuously, in response to changing circumstances. And here's the liberating part. If happiness is a flow, not a feeling, then you can be happy even when you're grieving, even when you're struggling, even when life is hard, as long as you're flowing well, living virtuously, being who you're capable of being. Man conquers the world by conquering himself. Okay, this one is pure Stoicism. This is the heart of it. External victory means nothing without internal mastery. Self-discipline and rational self-governance represent humanity's greatest achievement. Remember, Zeno lived in the aftermath of Alexander the Great. Alexander literally conquered the known world, from Greece to Egypt to India. He was the ultimate external conqueror, and he died at 32, probably from alcoholism or poisoning, having achieved everything externally and mastered nothing internally. Zeno's saying, that's not conquest, that's not victory. Real conquest is internal. Can you control your anger? Can you master your fear? Can you govern your desires? Can you think clearly when everyone around you is panicking? That's power. That's victory. And think about how radical this is as a redefinition of success. The world tells you, get more, achieve more, conquer more, expand your influence, your wealth, your territory, your followers. Zeno says, no, the real battle is internal. The real victory is self-mastery. Like, you can have 1 million followers on social media, but if you can't control your impulse to check your phone every 5 minutes, who's really in charge? You haven't conquered anything. You've been conquered by your own habits. The slide says, self-discipline and rational self-governance represent humanity's greatest achievement. And this connects directly to the physics and ethics we discussed. If you're a rational being, then your highest achievement is to actually be rational, to govern yourself according to reason, not to be governed by impulses, emotions, external circumstances. This is empowering because it means the most important victory is available to everyone. You don't need wealth, status, power, or luck to conquer yourself. A slave can achieve this victory. A sick person can achieve it. Someone who's lost everything can achieve it, because the battle is internal and the weapons are reason, discipline, and virtue. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we say. Okay, this one sounds like something your grandmother would tell you, right? Listen more, talk less. Good advice, sure, but is it philosophy? Yes, because for Zeno, this isn't just about being polite. It's about epistemology, how we gain knowledge. A reminder of humility and wisdom. Learning requires receptivity, whilst excessive speech often reveals ignorance rather than knowledge. Think about what happens when you're talking. You're outputting. You're expressing what you already know, or think you know. You're not learning anything new. But when you're listening, really listening, not just waiting for your turn to talk, you're receiving. You're open. You're capable of learning something you didn't know before. And here's what Zeno understood. Most of us vastly overestimate how much we know and underestimate how much we could learn. We're quick to speak, to give our opinion, to share our judgment. And every time we do that without really listening first, we're revealing our ignorance, not our wisdom. Remember, Stoicism emphasizes clear thinking, distinguishing truth from error, recognizing what you actually know versus what you just believe. And you can't do that if you're always talking. You can't examine your beliefs if you're constantly asserting them. You can't learn if you're not receptive. It's like Zeno's giving us a built-in ratio, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you speak. It's right there in your anatomy. But there's something else here too. Humility. The person who listens more than they speak is acknowledging that others might have something valuable to say, that they don't have all the answers. That wisdom might come from unexpected sources. And that's crucial for the cosmopolitan vision we discussed. If you're going to recognize the shared rationality of all humans, you have to be willing to listen to people different from you, to learn from them, to acknowledge their wisdom. So these 3 quotes, they're not random. They're not just nice sayings. Happiness is a good flow of life. That's the goal, the telos, what we're aiming for. Man conquers the world by conquering himself. That's the method, the path, how we achieve it. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. That's the attitude, the humility and receptivity we need along the way. And notice, all 3 are about internal states and choices, not external circumstances. The quality of your life's flow, internal. The conquest that matters, internal. The ratio of listening to speaking, your choice. This is practical wisdom you can actually use, today, right now. When you're stressed, ask, am I flowing well? Am I living virtuously in response to this? When you're tempted to blame circumstances, ask, have I conquered myself? Am I governing my own reactions? When you're about to give your opinion, ask, have I listened enough? Do I really understand? And that practical wisdom, those memorable, applicable insights, that's part of why Stoicism didn't just survive as an academic philosophy. It spread, it transformed lives, it influenced civilizations. Let's look at that legacy. All right, we need to talk about what happened after Zeno died around 262 BC, because this is where the story gets really interesting. Zeno created something that would outlive him by centuries, by millennia actually, and the path it took is fascinating. The slide breaks this down into 4 major phases, and I want to walk through each one because they show you how Stoicism adapted, evolved, and proved its relevance across radically different contexts. Ancient development. After Zeno's death circa 262 BC, Chrysippus systematized Stoic doctrine. The school flourished for 5 centuries, shaping Greek and Roman thought. Okay, Chrysippus. This is crucial. He was the 3rd head of the Stoic school, and he did for Stoicism what Aristotle's students did for Aristotelianism. He systematized it, defended it, wrote hundreds of books explaining and elaborating the doctrine. There was a saying in the ancient world, if there had been no Chrysippus, there would have been no Stoa, which is basically ancient Greek for the real MVP. But here's what matters. The school flourished for 5 centuries, 500 years. That's longer than the United States has existed. That's the entire span from the Renaissance to now. For 5 centuries, Stoicism was a living tradition, evolving, debating, attracting students, shaping how people thought about ethics, logic, physics, how to live. Roman adoption. Stoicism captivated Roman thinkers including Seneca, Epictetus, and Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who adapted its principles to governance and daily life. This is where Stoicism becomes world historical. Rome conquers Greece militarily, but as the saying goes, Greece conquers Rome culturally. And of all the Greek philosophies, Stoicism becomes the philosophy of Rome. And you can see why, right? Rome was practical, administrative, concerned with duty, governance, military discipline. Stoicism, with its emphasis on virtue, self-control, accepting what you can't change, doing your duty regardless of circumstances, it fit perfectly. But look at who adopted it. Seneca, a wealthy advisor to Nero. Epictetus, a former slave. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome. Think about that. The same philosophy speaks to a slave and an emperor. The same principles guide someone with no power and someone with absolute power. That's the universalism Zeno envisioned. That's cosmopolitanism in action. Seneca is writing letters about how to deal with grief, anger, the shortness of life, practical wisdom for anyone. Epictetus is teaching in his school, telling students, many of them slaves or poor, that they have something no one can take from them, their capacity for virtue, their rational choice. And Marcus Aurelius is writing in his private journal, never intended for publication, reminding himself of Stoic principles while leading an empire and fighting wars on the frontier. And by the way, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is basically the most powerful man in the world writing himself notes like, "Remember you're going to die, and stop caring what other people think, and just do your job." It's simultaneously the most relatable and the most extraordinary document. Renaissance Revival. Neo-Stoicism emerged during Europe's religious wars, offering ethical guidance grounded in reason rather than sectarian doctrine. Okay, fast forward about 400 years. Stoicism as an organized school is long dead. Christianity has dominated European thought for over a millennium, but then the Renaissance happens. Ancient texts are rediscovered, and people are reading Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius again. And here's why it mattered. Europe is tearing itself apart in religious wars. Catholics versus Protestants, sectarian violence, theological disputes leading to massacres. And into this chaos comes Stoicism, offering an ethics based on reason, not revelation, on nature, not scripture, on what all humans share, not what divides them. Thinkers like Justus Lipsius developed what's called Neo-Stoicism, adapting ancient Stoic principles to Christian contexts, using Stoic ideas about constancy, patience, and rational self-governance to navigate religious and political turmoil. It's not pure Stoicism, it's mixed with Christian elements, but the core ideas are there: virtue, reason, self-mastery, accepting what you can't control. Contemporary resurgence. Today's mindfulness, resilience training, and cognitive behavioral therapy all draw from Stoic principles, proving Zeno's wisdom timeless. And now we get to us. Right now. The 21st century, and Stoicism is everywhere. Cognitive behavioral therapy, the most empirically validated form of psychotherapy, is basically applied Stoicism. The idea that our thoughts create our emotions, that we can change our emotional responses by examining our beliefs, that's Epictetus, that's Zeno. Mindfulness practices, the emphasis on present moment awareness, accepting what is, not being carried away by judgments, Stoic principles. Resilience training in the military, in business, in athletics, built on Stoic ideas about controlling what you can control, accepting what you can't, focusing on your response rather than circumstances. And you can see why Stoicism resonates in our moment, right? We live in an age of information overload, constant change, political polarization, economic uncertainty, climate anxiety. We're bombarded with things we can't control, things that make us feel powerless. And Stoicism says, focus on what you can control. Your thoughts, your choices, your character. Everything else is external, indifferent, not up to you. That's the same message Zeno taught in the Stoa Poikile 2,300 years ago. The same message that helped a Roman slave endure bondage with dignity. The same message that guided an emperor through impossible responsibilities. And it works. It helps. It transforms lives. Athens honored Zeno with a public funeral and bronze statue. Rare tributes acknowledging his profound moral influence on the city and beyond. Think about what this means. Athens, proud, sophisticated, the intellectual center of the Greek world, gave a public funeral and erected a bronze statue to a foreign merchant turned philosopher. Not because he conquered anything, not because he was wealthy or powerful, because he taught people how to live well, And honestly, how many bronze statues have been erected for merchants? Not many. But for a merchant who lost everything and turned that loss into wisdom, that's worth commemorating. So here's the arc: a shipwreck in the 4th century BC, a school in a public porch, 5 centuries of ancient development, adoption by Rome, from slaves to emperors, revival during the Renaissance, and now, in our own chaotic times, a resurgence. That's not just historical interest. That's proof of relevance. That's evidence that Zeno tapped into something deep and true about human nature and how to live well. But we need to ask, why? Why does this ancient philosophy keep speaking to people across such different contexts? What makes it timeless? And to answer that, we need to look at the world Stoicism emerged from and how similar it is to our own. So we've traced this remarkable journey from a painted porch in Athens to cognitive behavioral therapy in the 21st century. From Zeno teaching anyone who would listen to Marcus Aurelius writing in his tent on the frontier. But I want to dig deeper into something, because it's not enough to say Stoicism has lasted a long time. We need to understand why. What is it about the world Stoicism emerged from, and the world we live in now, that makes this philosophy so relevant? Let's look at the parallels. Stoicism emerged as Greek city-states crumbled and Alexander's empire fragmented. Amidst political upheaval and uncertainty, Zeno offered something enduring: inner peace independent of external circumstances. Okay, we need to really understand the world Zeno lived in, because it wasn't stable, it wasn't secure. It was a world coming apart. For centuries, Greek identity had been tied to the polis, the city-state. You were Athenian, Spartan, Theban. Your city was your world, your identity, your security. Then Alexander the Great conquers everything. Suddenly the Mediterranean world is one vast empire. The old city-states are irrelevant. Greeks are living in Egypt, Persia, India. Everything that defined identity and meaning has been scrambled. And then Alexander dies. The empire fragments into warring kingdoms, political chaos, constant warfare, uncertainty about who's in charge, what the rules are, whether your city will even exist next year. Imagine what this does to people psychologically. Everything that gave life structure and meaning, the polis, tradition, stable social roles, it's all in flux. You can't rely on external circumstances for security because external circumstances are constantly changing. Political alliances shift. Kingdoms rise and fall. Today's ruler is tomorrow's exile. And into this chaos comes Zeno with a radical message. Stop looking for security in external things. Stop basing your peace of mind on circumstances you can't control. Find something that can't be taken from you. Cultivate something internal, virtue, reason, character, that remains stable regardless of what happens outside. Inner peace independent of external circumstances. That's not just philosophy. That's a survival strategy for a chaotic world. It's like Zeno looked at the world falling apart and said, "You know what? Maybe tying your happiness to external stability was always a bad idea. Let's try something else." Our fast-paced, digitally saturated age mirrors ancient anxieties. Climate crisis, political polarization, and information overload create similar feelings of powerlessness that Stoicism directly addresses. Okay, here's where we need to get real about our own moment. We live in an age of unprecedented change and uncertainty. Technology is transforming society faster than we can adapt. Climate change threatens the stability of civilization itself. Political systems are polarized and dysfunctional. Information comes at us constantly, most of it designed to provoke anxiety or outrage. And underneath all of this is a pervasive feeling of powerlessness. These are massive, systemic problems. What can any individual do? We scroll through news feeds filled with crises we can't solve. We watch political dysfunction we can't fix. We see environmental catastrophe we can't stop. We're bombarded with opinions, outrage, fear, all demanding our attention and emotional energy. And it's exhausting. It's overwhelming. It creates this constant background anxiety. Sound familiar? Sound like the world Zeno lived in? Different details, same structure. Massive forces beyond individual control, rapid change, uncertainty about the future, traditional sources of meaning and stability under threat. The ancient Greeks couldn't control which kingdom would rule them next year. We can't control climate change or political polarization or technological disruption. But here's what Stoicism understood then and what we need to understand now. You can still control how you respond. You can still live well. You can still be virtuous, rational, at peace. The slide mentions feelings of powerlessness, and that's exactly right. That's the psychological state Stoicism addresses. Because Stoicism makes a crucial distinction. You're not powerless over everything. You're powerless over external circumstances. But you have complete power over your own mind, your own choices, your own character. Like, I can't fix climate change by myself. But I can control whether I spend my day in paralyzed anxiety or whether I take rational action on the things I actually can influence, my own carbon footprint, my political engagement, my support for effective solutions. I can't control social media algorithms designed to make me angry, but I can control whether I engage with them, how much time I spend on them, whether I let them shape my emotional state. This is what Stoicism offers. A way to reclaim agency in a world that makes you feel powerless. Not by denying the problems, not by pretending you can control everything, but by focusing your energy where you actually have power, your own mind, your own choices, your own character, timeless tools. Zeno's emphasis on rational thinking, emotional regulation, and ethical living provides practical frameworks for navigating contemporary challenges whilst maintaining dignity and purpose. Let me break down what this actually means in practice. Rational thinking. In an age of misinformation, conspiracy theories, and emotionally manipulative media, the Stoic emphasis on clear thinking, logical analysis, and distinguishing truth from error is more relevant than ever. Before you share that outrage-inducing post, ask, is this actually true? What's the evidence? What are my sources? Am I being manipulated? That's applied Stoicism. Emotional regulation. In an age designed to keep you anxious, angry, and addicted to dopamine hits, the Stoic practice of examining your emotions, understanding their sources, and transforming destructive reactions into rational responses is essential. When you feel that surge of anger at a political opponent or that wave of anxiety about the future, pause. Ask, what belief is creating this emotion? Is that belief rational? Is this emotional response helping me? That's applied Stoicism. Ethical living. In an age of moral relativism, cynicism, and everyone's just looking out for themselves, the Stoic commitment to virtue, justice, and the common good provides an anchor. You can't control whether other people act ethically, but you can control whether you do. You can maintain your integrity regardless of circumstances. That's applied Stoicism. The slide says these provide practical frameworks for navigating contemporary challenges whilst maintaining dignity and purpose. And that's the key. Dignity and purpose. Stoicism doesn't promise to make your problems go away. It doesn't promise to make the world less chaotic or uncertain. But it does promise that you can face whatever comes with dignity, with your character intact, your reason functioning, your virtue uncompromised. And it promises that you can find purpose not in external achievements or circumstances, but in the quality of your own life, the excellence of your own character, the rationality of your own choices. The philosophy continues inspiring seekers of wisdom, emotional strength, and ethical living across cultures and generations. And you know why? Because the fundamental human situation hasn't changed. We still face uncertainty. We still encounter things we can't control. We still struggle with emotions, desires, fears. We still have to figure out how to live well in an imperfect world. The details change: city-states versus nation-states, shipwrecks versus economic crashes, ancient warfare versus modern crises. But the core challenge remains. How do you live a good life when you can't control circumstances? How do you find peace when the world is chaotic? How do you maintain virtue when it would be easier not to? Zeno answered those questions 2,300 years ago, and his answers still work, which brings us to the end of our journey, and to the question of what this all means for you. All right, let's bring this home. From the wreckage of a merchant ship emerged one of humanity's most influential philosophical systems. Zeno of Kition transformed personal misfortune into universal wisdom, teaching that true happiness flows from virtue, reason, and harmony with nature. Think about that journey. A merchant loses everything, wanders into a bookshop, discovers philosophy, studies with radical thinkers, creates something entirely new, teaches in a public porch, influences emperors and slaves, shapes Western civilization, speaks to us today. That's not just a biography. That's a demonstration of the philosophy itself. Because what did Zeno do when he lost everything? He didn't despair. He didn't give up. He didn't spend his life bitter about what he'd lost. He transformed the experience. He used it. He let it redirect him toward something more valuable than cargo, toward wisdom, virtue, understanding how to live well. He proved that you can lose everything external and still flourish, still create something meaningful, still live a good life. His vision of cosmopolitanism and universal brotherhood challenged ancient prejudices and continues inspiring modern movements for equality and justice. We talked about this earlier. The radical idea that we're all citizens of the cosmos, that artificial divisions don't determine moral worth, that reason and virtue are universal. But I want you to appreciate how revolutionary this remains. We still divide ourselves. We still create in-groups and out-groups. We still act like nationality, race, religion, political tribe determine who deserves respect and who doesn't. And Stoicism says, no, we're all rational beings. We all have the capacity for virtue. We all participate in the same cosmic order. That vision challenged ancient prejudices, and it challenges our prejudices too, which is probably why it's still controversial. If Stoicism just confirmed what we already believed, it wouldn't be philosophy. It would be self-help. Self-mastery, not external conquest, represents humanity's highest achievement. This is the heart of it. This is what makes Stoicism different. The world tells you to conquer, achieve, accumulate, expand, get more, be more, do more. And Stoicism says, the real achievement is internal. Can you govern yourself? Can you live rationally? Can you be virtuous regardless of circumstances? That's available to everyone. Right now. Regardless of your circumstances. You don't need wealth to practice virtue. You don't need power to live rationally. You don't need perfect circumstances to be a good person. You just need to choose it, to commit to it, to practice it. As we face our own uncertainties and challenges, Stoicism invites us to cultivate courage, wisdom, justice, and temperance, to live with tranquility amidst chaos and find meaning through virtuous action. Courage, wisdom, justice, temperance, not as abstract ideals, as practical responses to real challenges. When you face something difficult, and you will, courage means facing it rationally, not running from it or being paralyzed by it. When you encounter complexity, and you will, wisdom means thinking clearly, examining your beliefs, distinguishing truth from error. When you see injustice, and you will, justice means doing what's right, acting fairly, contributing to the common good. When you feel pulled by desires or impulses, and you will, temperance means governing yourself, making rational choices, not being controlled by passions. The slide says, Stoicism invites us to live with tranquility amidst chaos. Not by denying the chaos, not by pretending everything's fine, but by finding a stable center within ourselves, virtue, reason, character, that remains calm regardless of external turbulence. It's like being the eye of the hurricane. The storm is real, the chaos is real, but there's a center of calm where you can think clearly and act rationally. That's what Stoicism offers. Zeno's legacy endures because the questions he asked remain urgent. How should we live? What truly matters? How can we find peace? How should we live? What truly matters? How can we find peace? These aren't ancient questions. These are your questions. My questions. Everyone's questions. And they're especially urgent in moments of crisis, uncertainty, loss, when the easy answers don't work anymore, when external circumstances fail us, when we're forced to confront what really matters. Zeno asked these questions after a shipwreck. You might ask them after a different kind of loss, a relationship, a job, a dream, your health, someone you love. The circumstances change, the questions remain. And Stoicism's answer, Zeno's answer, is this: live according to nature and reason. Cultivate virtue. Focus on what you can control. Accept what you can't. Be rational, courageous, just, temperate. Recognize your connection to all rational beings. Find your peace internally, not externally. That's it. That's the wisdom that emerged from a shipwreck 2,300 years ago. And here's what's remarkable. It works. It helps. It transforms lives. Not because it makes problems disappear, but because it gives you a way to face them with dignity, purpose, and peace. Not because it promises easy answers, but because it offers hard truths that actually hold up under pressure. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's true. So here's my challenge to you. Don't just learn about Stoicism. Try it, test it, apply it to your own life. The next time you face something you can't control, ask, what can I control? How can I respond virtuously? The next time you feel overwhelmed by emotions, ask, what belief is creating this? Is it rational? The next time you're tempted to divide people into us and them, remember, we're all citizens of the cosmos. We all share reason. Zeno didn't create Stoicism in a library. He created it in response to real loss, real uncertainty, real challenges. And it's meant to be used the same way, not as abstract theory, but as practical wisdom for living well in an imperfect world. You probably won't lose your cargo in a shipwreck, but you'll face your own storms, your own losses, your own moments when everything you relied on falls apart. And when that happens, you'll have a choice. Let it destroy you, or let it transform you. Zeno chose transformation. He chose wisdom. He chose to build something meaningful from the wreckage. And that choice, that fundamental choice about how to respond to what life throws at you, that's available to you too. That's the enduring wisdom of Zeno of Kition. That's why a merchant who lost everything 2,300 years ago still has something to teach us. That's why Stoicism endures. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. Thank you.